A privileged bully thought he could break the new black girl with a cruel prank. But when Lachlan Merrick hosed Nyla Ainsworth in front of the entire school, he didn't realize she was a Taekwondo black belt who fought with the precision of a warrior. The autumn breeze swept across Ridgemont Prep's manicure courtyard, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and privilege. Students clustered in their familiar tribes. Athletes by the fountain, theater kids near the arts wing, the elite near the main steps. Standing apart from it all was Nyla Ainsworth, newly transferred from her inner-city school, her posture military straight, her eyes missing nothing. She felt the stares, heard the hushed comments. Did you see her hair? Where'd she even come from? But her grandmother's voice echoed louder. Let them underestimate you, baby. That's when you're most dangerous. During lunch period, Nyla found a quiet spot on the courtyard steps, textbook open, focused. That's when Lachlan Merrick made his move. The school's golden boy, blonde hair, varsity jacket, cruel smirk, came around the corner with a garden hose, his crew filming on their phones. The jet of cold water hit Nyla full force, soaking her uniform, her hair, her books. The courtyard exploded with laughter and gasps. But Nyla didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply stood, water dripping from her clothes, and locked eyes with Lachlan. A look so intense it made him falter mid-laugh. Without a word, she gathered her soaked belongings and walked away with dignity that silenced the crowd. That night, in her garage dojo, Nyla tied her black belt with practiced precision. Her knuckles connected with a heavy bag in rhythmic thunder, jab cross, roundhouse kick. Each strike was controlled devastation. She wasn't angry. She was ready, because Lachlan Merrick had just made a mistake that would teach him what real strength looked like. Nyla Ainsworth's grandmother always said that walking into a new place was like stepping onto a mat before a match. You had to read the room before you made your first move. As Nyla pushed through the heavy oak doors of Ridgemont Prep on that crisp Monday morning, she understood exactly what her grandmother meant. The hallway stretched before her like a canyon of polished marble and privilege, lined with trophy cases that gleamed under fluorescent lights. Students moved in practice choreography, their designer backpacks and perfectly distressed jeans signaling a world Nyla had only seen in movies. She adjusted the strap of her simple black backpack and walked with purpose, her sneakers quiet against the floor. Around her, conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes followed her progress, some curious, some calculating, some already dismissive. A group of girls in matching athletic were whispered behind cupped hands near the water fountain. Two boys in lacrosse jerseys openly stared, then exchanged looks that said everything without words. Nyla kept her expression neutral, her grandmother's voice steady in her mind. Don't shrink yourself for nobody's comfort, baby. The architecture itself felt like a statement. Vaulted ceilings, art installations in alcoves, a chandelier hanging over the main staircase, as if the school were a country club instead of a place of learning. Her old school had metal detectors and peeling paint. This place had a coffee bar in the commons area and students casually discussing ski trips. The contrast wasn't lost on Nyla, but she refused to let it intimidate her. She'd earned her place here through a diversity scholarship and a 4.2 GPA. She belonged, whether they thought so or not. Who's the new girl? Someone muttered as she passed, the question floating just loud enough to be heard. Looks way too serious, another voice added, followed by muffled laughter. Nyla found her locker, number 247, tucked in the junior hallway, and methodically organized her books. Chemistry, advanced English, calculus, history. Each textbook placed with precision, a habit from years of Taekwondo training where discipline bled into every aspect of life. A blonde girl 2 lockers down glanced over, her perfectly winged eyeliner sharp enough to cut glass. She looked Nyla up and down, lingered on her natural hair pulled into a simple bun, her plain button-up shirt, her serious demeanor, then turned back to her friend with a barely concealed smirk. The morning bell echoed through the hallways like a gong. Students flowed toward classrooms in practice patterns, leaving Nyla standing alone for just a moment. She closed her locker with a soft click, checked her class schedule one more time, and moved forward. This was day one. She'd survived harder things than judgmental stares and whispered comments. What none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly know, was that the too serious girl walking among them had hands registered as weapons and a warrior's heart beating steady beneath her quiet exterior. The door to AP English was already open when Nyla arrived, 30 seconds before the bell. Mrs. Hartford, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses dangling from a beaded chain, looked up from her desk with a warm smile that felt genuine. The first Nyla had received all morning. "You must be Nyla Ainsworth. Welcome. Please, take any available seat." Nyla scanned the classroom. 24 desks arranged in a semicircle, most already occupied. Students chatted easily, draped over their chairs with the casual confidence of people who'd known each other since elementary school. The available seats were clustered in two areas, one near the front by a girl furiously scribbling in a notebook, and one in the back corner near the windows. She chose the front. Always choose the front. Her grandmother's rule. As she settled into her seat, pulling out her worn copy of Invisible Man and a notebook with crisp, unmarked pages, the energy in the room shifted. The door swung open wider, and three boys strolled in with the kind of synchronized swagger that announced hierarchy without words. The one in the center commanded immediate attention, not through effort, but through expectation. Lachlan Merrick was everything Ridgemont Prep celebrated. Sandy blonde hair, styled with calculated messiness. A varsity soccer jacket worn over an expensive polo, the kind of angular jaw that looked like it came from a catalog. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Pale blue and assessing, the eyes of someone who'd never been told no, never been made to feel small, never questioned his right to any space he occupied. His friends flanked him like accessories. To his left, a stocky boy with red hair and freckles, probably a linebacker based on his build, carried himself with borrowed confidence. To his right, a leaner guy with dark hair gelled into submission wore the same brand name everything as Lachlan, a living echo of the leader's taste. They moved toward the back of the classroom, their conversation loud enough to override the ambient chatter. "Bro, that shot I made Saturday was insane," Lachlan said, dropping into his seat with theatrical casualness. "Coach said it was the best assist he's seen in 3 years." You basically won the game single-handedly," Red Hair agreed, the admiration in his voice bordering on worship. "I mean, someone had to," Lachlan replied with a smirk that suggested false modesty performed for an audience. As they settled, Lachlan's gaze swept the room with the practiced efficiency of a predator checking his territory. His eyes caught on Nyla, lingered, narrowed almost imperceptibly. She felt the weight of his assessment. Her simple clothes, her serious expression, her otherness in this sea of suburban sameness. His lips quirked, not quite a smile, more like a dismissal rendered in facial expression. He leaned toward his friends, and though he lowered his voice, Nyla's sharp hearing caught the words anyway. "Diversity scholarship," he murmured, the phrase dripping with implication. "Bet you $20 she's gone by winter break." They never last. Dark hair snickered. "Dude, she looks like she's about to take a standardized test just sitting there." "Probably her first time seeing a school that isn't falling apart," Red Hair added, and they all laughed, quiet enough to fly under Mrs. Hartford's radar, loud enough to mark their territory. Nyla's jaw tightened fractionally, the only outward sign she'd heard anything. She opened her notebook to a fresh page, clicked her pen once, and wrote the date in neat, precise handwriting. Her grandmother's voice again, "Let them talk, baby. Word are just noise. Actions are what matter." Mrs. Hartford called the class to order, beginning a discussion about Ralph Ellison's exploration of identity and invisibility. Nyla's hand was the first to rise when a question was posed about the narrator's journey. Her answer was articulate, insightful, referencing specific passages with the ease of someone who'd actually done the reading, more than the reading. She'd analyzed it. Mrs. Hartford's face lit up. "Excellent observation, Nyla. You've clearly engaged deeply with the text." Behind her, Nyla heard a barely audible scoff. She didn't turn around. Didn't need to. She knew exactly where it came from. As the discussion continued, other students gradually joined in, but Nyla noticed a pattern. When she spoke, there was a beat of silence afterward, a collective recalibration. When Lachlan spoke, offering superficial observations wrapped in confident delivery, students nodded immediately, eager to agree. Mrs. Hartford seemed oblivious to the social dynamics playing out beneath her literary analysis, but Nyla read them clearly. The bell rang 45 minutes later. Students gathered their belongings with the chaotic energy of people released from obligation. Nyla packed her bag with the same methodical precision she'd used to unpack it, aware of Lachlan and his friends passing behind her. "Try hard." Someone coughed into their fist as they walked by. Nyla's hand paused on her zipper for just a second. Then she pulled it closed, shouldered her bag, and stood. Mrs. Hartford caught her eye and smiled encouragingly. Nyla returned it with a small nod before heading toward the door. 3 more classes until lunch. She could handle 3 more classes. She'd handled worse than entitled boys with fragile egos and too much power. What they saw as her weakness, her seriousness, her focus, her difference, was actually her greatest strength. They just didn't know it yet. The cafeteria at Ridgemont Prep was less a dining hall and more a social amphitheater, a space where hierarchies were performed daily with the precision of theater. Nyla stood at the entrance, tray in hand, surveying the landscape of round tables and predetermined alliances. The jocks claimed the center tables near the windows, their laughter carrying across the room like a territorial call. Cheerleaders and their satellites occupied the adjacent zone, a buffer kingdom of popularity. Theater kids clustered near the far wall, animated and loud. Academic types hunched over textbooks at smaller tables, eating absently while highlighting passages. Nyla had no illusions about where she fit in this ecosystem. Nowhere yet. Maybe never. And she'd made peace with that before she'd even walked through Ridgemont's doors. She bypassed the hot lunch line, something called artisan flatbread pizza that looked suspiciously like regular pizza with a markup, and headed to the salad bar. Grilled chicken, mixed greens, cherry tomatoes, a modest amount of dressing. Fuel, not entertainment. At the register, she handed over her scholarship meal card, acutely aware of the girl behind her pulling out an actual credit card for lunch. Different worlds, same building. With her tray balanced carefully, Nyla scanned for options. Every table seemed full, or worse, full with strategic empty seats that communicated "not for you" through body language alone. Then she spotted it. The courtyard visible through the glass doors of the cafeteria's rear exit. Tables outside, mostly empty on this mild October day, shaded by old oak trees that probably predated the school by decades. Perfect. She pushed through the doors into fresh air and relative peace. The courtyard was beautiful in an understated way. Brick pathways, scattered benches, a small fountain in the center that burbled quietly. A few students sat in distant corners, earbuds in, absorbed in their phones. Nyla chose a table near the brick steps leading back toward the main building, partially hidden by the shade of a massive oak. She could see the cafeteria through the glass, but she was removed from its chaos. She pulled out her chemistry textbook along with her lunch, propping it open to Chapter 4, Molecular Structures. Her plan was simple: eat, study, survive until the final bell. The salad was crisp, the chicken adequately seasoned. She took measured bites between reading, her focus absolute. Inside the cafeteria, Lachlan Merrick held court at his usual table, surrounded by his inner circle and an ever-rotating cast of social climbers, hoping for a moment of his attention. But his focus had drifted. Through the glass, he'd spotted Nyla sitting alone outside, head bent over a textbook like she was in a library instead of lunch period. "Look at her," he said, nodding toward the courtyard. His friends followed his gaze. Literally day one, and she's already acting like she's too good to sit with anyone. Tyler, the red-haired linebacker, squinted through the glass. "Maybe she's just shy." "Shy." Lachlan scoffed. "Bro." She raised her hand like 8 times in English. "She's not shy. She's stuck up. Thinks she's smarter than everyone. She probably is smarter than everyone at this table, said a girl named Madison, picking at her salad with mild disinterest. She was one of the few people who could get away with challenging Lachlan without consequence. Old money, connected parents, and genuinely didn't care about his approval. Lachlan shot her a look. Whose side are you on? Madison shrugged. Reality's side. I'm just saying. But Lachlan wasn't listening anymore. An idea was forming, the kind that always started with that particular glint in his eye. Mischief mixed with cruelty, wrapped in the excuse of just joking around. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Where are you going? Asked Jaden, the dark-haired one who served as Lachlan's unofficial publicist. To give a new girl a proper Ridgemont welcome. Lachlan's smile was all teeth, no warmth. He walked with purpose toward the cafeteria's side exit, the one that led to the maintenance area, and, more importantly, to the outdoor water spigot where the groundskeepers kept their hoses. Tyler and Jaden exchanged glances, then followed, because that's what they always did. A few other students noticed the movement and trailed along, phones already emerging from pockets. Something was about to happen, and at Ridgemont Prep, witnessing was currency. Outside, Nyla had just finished annotating a particularly complex diagram about covalent bonds when she sensed the shift in atmosphere. That warrior's instinct her Taekwondo master had drilled into her, awareness of space, of approaching energy, of danger before it announced itself. She looked up to see Lachlan rounding the corner of the building, a green garden hose in his hands, already uncoiling. His friends flanked him, phones raised. Other students gathered near the cafeteria windows, faces pressed against glass. Nyla's body tensed, muscle memory engaging before her conscious mind caught up. She calculated distances, angles, escape routes, then forced herself still. Not yet. Not here. Not now. Lachlan's grin widened as he turned the nozzle. Welcome to Ridgemont, scholarship girl. The water hit her with shocking force, cold and relentless. It soaked her shirt instantly, plastered her hair to her scalp, drenched her textbook, and carefully prepared lunch. The pressure was deliberate, humiliating, designed to make her stumble. Inside the cafeteria, students screamed and laughed. Phones captured everything. But Nyla didn't move, didn't cry out, didn't give him the reaction he wanted. She simply stood, water streaming from her clothes, and locked eyes with Lachlan Merrick. Her gaze was so steady, so utterly devoid of fear, that his laughter faltered mid-breath. Then she gathered her soaked belongings and walked away, each step measured and deliberate, leaving only puddles and stunned silence in her wake. The water hit like a physical blow, not a spray, but a weaponized stream that stole her breath and rattled her composure. Cold shocked through every nerve ending, the kind of cold that bypassed skin and went straight to bone. Nyla's textbook pages dissolved into pulp. Her salad scattered across the table in a chaos of greens and tomatoes. Water filled her shoes, her pockets, streamed down her face and into her eyes. And for one crystalline second, Nyla Ainsworth disappeared. In her place stood someone else, someone forged in 12 years of brutal training, someone whose body knew exactly how to respond to aggression. Her weight shifted automatically to the balls of her feet. Her hands began to rise, muscle memory executing the opening sequence of a counterattack she performed 10,000 times. 3 steps forward, redirect the water source with a sweeping block, close the distance, rising elbow to solar plexus, follow with a palm strike to the face, spin into a roundhouse kick that would put Lachlan Merrick on his back before he understood what happened. She could see it unfold with perfect clarity, his shocked expression, the hose falling from his hands, his friend scrambling backward, the satisfying sound of his body hitting the brick pathway. It would take 4 seconds, maybe 5 if she wanted to add a joint lock for emphasis. Her body screamed to move, to defend, to dominate the threat. But her grandmother's voice cut through the rage like a blade through water. A black belt isn't about fighting, baby. It's about choosing when to fight. And sometimes the strongest choice is to stand still. Nyla forced her hands down, forced her breathing to steady even as her lungs burned from the cold, forced her stance to soften when every instinct demanded she become a weapon. The internal war lasted 3 heartbeats. 3 eternal heartbeats where she wrestled her training into submission, where discipline battled reflex, and somehow, impossibly, won. The laughter around her was deafening. Through the cafeteria windows, students pressed against the glass like spectators at an aquarium, phones raised high, capturing her humiliation in high definition. Tyler doubled over, slapping his knee. Jaden was already typing, probably uploading to Instagram before the water even stopped flowing. Other students who'd followed outside formed a loose semicircle, their faces displaying various shades of amusement, shock, and secondhand embarrassment. Lachlan finally released the nozzle, the stream dying to a dribble, then nothing. He stood there in his dry varsity jacket, that insufferable smirk plastered across his face, waiting for her to cry or scream or run, waiting for the reaction that would cement his dominance, that would mark her as broken. Instead, Nyla met his eyes with a look so cold, so absolutely controlled, that his smirk faltered. She didn't blink, didn't look away, just held his gaze with the calm of someone who'd faced down black belts twice her size in competition rings where real consequences lived. Then, moving with deliberate dignity, she gathered her destroyed textbook, her scattered belongings, and walked away, each step leaving wet footprints on the brick like evidence of his mistake. The cafeteria doors felt impossibly far away, though they were only 30 feet from where Nyla stood dripping. 30 feet that might as well have been 30 miles, stretched across a minefield of judgment and jeering faces. Water squelched in her shoes with each step. Her button-up shirt clung to her skin, transparent in places she was acutely aware of. Her natural hair, usually so carefully maintained, hung in wet ropes against her neck and shoulders. But she walked, one foot in front of the other, spine straight, chin level, eyes forward. Behind her, the laughter continued to build like a wave, finding its rhythm. Lachlan's voice rose above the noise, performative and loud enough to ensure everyone heard. Damn. Not even a reaction? What, you mute or something? Tyler's hyena laugh followed. Bro, she's just gonna walk away? That's it. She looks like a drowned rat, someone else called out, and the comment triggered fresh peals of laughter from the gathered crowd. Nyla's hands trembled, not from cold, though she was freezing, but from the sheer force of will it took to keep them at her sides instead of forming the fists her body demanded. Every step was a negotiation with her training, with her pride, with the 15-year-old girl inside her who wanted to scream that this wasn't fair, that she'd done nothing to deserve this, that they had no right. But her grandmother's lessons had been thorough. The world doesn't care about fair, baby, and your enemies will always use your reactions against you. Give them nothing. Absolutely nothing. So she gave him nothing. Through the cafeteria glass, the students inside had abandoned all pretense of eating. They lined the windows like spectators at a gladiator arena, phones recording, faces animated with the peculiar excitement that comes from witnessing someone else's humiliation. A girl Nyla vaguely recognized from second period had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide, while a friend whispered something that made them both laugh. 2 boys were already re-watching the video, the phone screen's glow reflecting off their delighted faces. Nyla reached for the door handle with a hand that refused to shake, despite everything. The metal was warm from the sun, a sharp contrast to her frozen fingers. She pulled it open and stepped into the cafeteria's climate-controlled air, immediately aware of how the temperature shift made her wet clothes feel even colder, made her body want to shiver and betray her composure. The noise hit next, not just sound but a wall of reaction. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The entire cafeteria seemed to pivot in her direction, a collective turning that made her hyper-aware of every eye, every phone camera, every whispered comment. Oh my God, she's so... Did you see what Lachlan just did? She didn't even fight back. That's so pathetic. That last word, whispered by a girl in a cheerleading uniform, carried across the sudden quiet with crystal clarity. Pathetic. The judgment rendered, the verdict delivered. And around her, Nyla felt the agreement rippling through the crowd. Not sympathy, not outrage on her behalf, just dismissal wrapped in secondhand embarrassment. The social calculus that said her refusal to engage made her weak, made her a victim, made her someone not worth defending. No one stood up. No one said anything. No one challenged what had just happened. Mrs. Hartford wasn't here. She had lunch duty next period. The cafeteria monitors were clustered near the food line, either oblivious or deliberately looking away. The adult world was conspicuously absent, leaving Nyla to navigate this moment entirely alone. She walked through the cafeteria with water dripping from her clothes, leaving a trail across the polished floor. Students parted automatically, creating a path that felt less like courtesy and more like quarantine. As if humiliation were contagious, as if proximity to her social death might somehow taint them by association. Madison, Lachlan's friend from English class, sat at a table near Nyla's path. Their eyes met for just a second, and Nyla saw something there. Not quite sympathy, but perhaps recognition. A flicker of "this is wrong" that died as quickly as it appeared, snuffed out by social self-preservation. Madison looked away first, suddenly very interested in her phone. The hallway outside the cafeteria was mercifully empty, most students still at lunch or claiming outdoor spaces for the remaining period. Nyla's footsteps echoed in the corridor, each wet footprint on the marble floor a temporary mark of her passage. Her locker was 2 hallways away, too far to make it without being seen by more people, but closer than the parking lot where her grandmother's old Camry waited. She made it to the girls' bathroom near the library, pushed through the door, and locked herself in the furthest stall. Only then, surrounded by industrial beige tiles and the antiseptic smell of institutional cleaning products, did she allow her hands to shake. Only then did she press her palms against her eyes and take 3 deep, shuddering breaths that threatened to become sobs. But she didn't cry. Wouldn't give them that either. Instead, she pulled out her phone, miraculously dry in her backpack's interior pocket, and texted her grandmother, "Need gym clothes. Locker 247. Emergency." The response came within seconds. "On my way, baby girl." Nyla leaned her head against the cool metal of the stall divider and finally, privately, allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. But even here, alone, she remained in control, because control was all she had left, and soon it would be all she needed. The garage-turned dojo had been Nyla's sanctuary since the family moved into the modest rental house 3 weeks ago. Her grandmother had helped her transform the space with the same methodical care they applied to everything. Hanging mirrors on one wall, laying down puzzle-piece foam mats, mounting a heavy bag in the corner where it could swing freely. A small altar sat on a shelf, holding a framed photo of Nyla's grandfather in his military uniform, a candle, and a certificate from her black belt test dated 2 years ago. The space smelled like rubber mats and the faint incense her grandmother burned during meditation. Nyla stood in the center of the mats, her dobok crisp and white against her brown skin, the fabric still holding the sharp creases from being freshly washed. In her hands, she held her black belt. Not the worn one she used for regular practice, but the ceremonial one her master had presented at her Dan testing. The silk was smooth, heavy with meaning, the embroidered gold characters spelling out her name, in Korean running along one end. She wrapped the belt around her waist with ritualistic precision. Left over right, around the back, through the loop, tie the knot, adjust until both ends hung perfectly even. The action had become meditation itself over the years, each movement a reminder of the journey that had brought her here. The early morning practices, the bruises, the failures, the moments she'd wanted to quit, but didn't. The belt settled against her waist like an old promise kept. Through the side door that led from the garage into the kitchen, she could hear her grandmother moving around, the familiar sounds of dinner preparation, the sizzle of something in a pan, the cabinet opening and closing, the gospel music playing softly from the radio. Grandmother had asked only one question when she'd arrived at school with dry clothes. "Did you hit him?" "No, ma'am." "Good girl. But you're going to, aren't you?" Nyla had smiled despite everything. "Not the way you're thinking." Now, alone in her dojo, she bowed to the altar, a deep, respectful bow that honored everyone who'd invested in her journey. Then she settled into the opening stance of Taegu Pal Jang, the most advanced form she knew, the one required for black belt testing. Her feet positioned shoulder-width apart, hands at her sides, breathing centered deep in her diaphragm. The form began slowly, deliberately. Each movement was a conversation between body and intention. The low block transitioning into a middle punch, the pivot into back stance, the knife hand strike cutting through air with a whisper of displaced atmosphere. Her reflection in the mirror showed perfect technique, but her mind was elsewhere, working through the problem Lachlan Merrick had created. Fighting him directly was the obvious solution, the one her body craved. But obvious was rarely smart. If she attacked him on campus, she'd be expelled. Zero-tolerance policies didn't care about context or provocation. If she confronted him off campus, she risked assault charges. Her hands were literally registered weapons after her black belt certification, a technicality that made her legally liable in ways other teenagers weren't. She transitioned into a jumping front kick, landing in perfect balance, then flowed into a series of rapid-fire punches that made the air crack. Sweat began to form on her forehead, her breathing deepening but still controlled. No, direct confrontation would play into exactly what they expected, the aggressive new girl confirming their biases, giving them justification to remove her from space they'd already decided she didn't belong in. They wanted her gone by winter break? She'd heard Lachlan say it. She'd prove them catastrophically wrong, but she'd do it on her terms. The form demanded a spinning hook kick, and Nyla executed it flawlessly, her body rotating through space with the precision of a blade. Her foot extended at the apex of the spin, would have connected with an opponent's temple if one had been present. But the real opponent wasn't Lachlan. It was the system that had allowed him to become what he was: unchecked, entitled, cruel because cruelty carried no consequences. She needed something public, something legal, something that would expose him not just to her, but to everyone who'd laughed, everyone who'd recorded, everyone who'd decided her silence meant weakness. The form concluded with a low block and a kahap, a shout from deep in her core that echoed off the garage walls. H. The sound carried power, intention, controlled violence, waiting for direction. Nyla held the final stance, breathing hard now, sweat running down her temples. In the mirror, her reflection looked back. Not the soaked, humiliated girl from lunch, but a warrior in her proper uniform, centered and dangerous. The solution came to her with sudden clarity, so obvious she almost laughed. Ridgemont Prep had a martial arts club. She'd seen it listed in the student activities handbook they'd given her during orientation. Taekwondo, karate, self-defense, all offered after school, all sanctioned and supervised. And according to the handbook, the club held demonstration matches twice a semester, open to the whole school. Public, legal, definitive. Nyla bowed again to the altar, this time with a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Tomorrow she'd find a club advisor. Tomorrow she'd register. And soon, very soon, Lachlan Merrick would learn the difference between someone who couldn't fight back and someone who chose not to. The choice was about to change. Tuesday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of October day that felt like summer's last stand before autumn truly settled in. Nyla stood in front of her bedroom mirror, evaluating her reflection with the same critical eye she used to assess her stance before a match. Dark jeans without tears or distressing, a burgundy sweater that her grandmother had pressed that morning, white sneakers that were clean but not expensive. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun at the base of her neck, not a single strand out of place. Simple silver studs in her ears, her grandfather's gift on her 13th birthday. She looked composed, unremarkable, exactly what she needed. "You sure you want to go back today?" Her grandmother called from the kitchen, where breakfast smells, eggs, turkey bacon, toast, promised normalcy that Nyla didn't quite feel. "Yes, ma'am, I'm sure. You know you don't have to prove anything to those people." Nyla grabbed her backpack, checking one more time that she had the martial arts club application form she'd printed last night, folded neatly in the front pocket. "I'm not proving anything to them, Grandma. I'm proving it to myself." Her grandmother appeared in the doorway, dish towel in hand, her silver locks wrapped in a colorful scarf. She studied Nyla with eyes that had seen her through every stage of life. The colicky baby, the stubborn toddler, the determined athlete. That's my girl. But baby, if it gets to be too much. It won't. Nyla kissed her grandmother's cheek. I promise. The drive to school was quiet, just the low hum of the Camry's engine and the gospel station playing softly. When they pulled into the drop-off circle, Nyla noticed her grandmother's hands tighten on the steering wheel, her jaw setting in that particular way that meant she was holding back words she wanted to say. I love you, Grandma. Love you too, baby girl. More than you know. Nyla stepped out of the car and into the lion's den. The first thing she noticed was the stares, more than yesterday, more intense, loaded with a knowledge they hadn't possessed before. Students clustered in their usual morning groups, but conversations paused as she passed. Phones appeared, not even trying to be subtle. Cameras pointed in her direction. A few people had the decency to look away when she made eye contact. Most didn't bother. Near the main entrance, a group of sophomore girls huddled around a phone, their laughter high-pitched and performative. One of them glanced up, saw Nyla, and immediately elbowed her friend. The phone disappeared into a pocket, but not before Nyla caught a glimpse of the screen. A freeze frame of her, soaked and standing in the courtyard, water streaming down her face. The video had been everywhere by dinner time yesterday. Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. Even a few students had texted it directly to her number, though she had no idea how they'd gotten it. The captions varied. New girl getting wrecked face with tears of joy. Welcome to Ridgemont. When you think you're too good to sit with people, each post had hundreds of likes, dozens of comments, most of them some variation of cruel. She'd watched it once, her grandmother sitting beside her on the couch, hand resting supportively on Nyla's shoulder. Watched herself stand there, water hitting her, watched her face go carefully blank, watched herself gather her things and walk away. In the comments, the consensus was universal. Pathetic, weak, coward, doormat, won't last a month. Lachlan had posted it to his own account with the caption, gave a new girl the Ridgemont welcome hashtag, just joking hashtag, can't take a joke, for 1,000 likes. His most popular post ever. Now, walking through the hallway toward her locker, Nyla felt the weight of that video in every glance, every whispered comment, every barely contained smirk. The story had calcified overnight into school legend. The stuck-up new girl who thought she was better than everyone got put in her place and couldn't even defend herself. At her locker, someone had taped a printed screenshot from the video with the words, "Welcome T.O. Ridgemont," scrawled across it in red marker. Nyla removed it carefully, folded it once, and placed it in the trash can 3 lockers down. Her hands didn't shake. Her expression didn't change. Hey, the voice came from behind her. Madison, the girl from English class with the perfect eyeliner. She stood with her arms crossed, looking uncomfortable but determined. That was messed up. What Lachlan did. Nyla turned, measuring the statement for sincerity. Madison's discomfort seemed genuine, even if it had taken her a full day to express it. Thanks. I mean, he takes things too far sometimes. He thinks everything's just a joke, but Madison trailed off, perhaps realizing that explaining away cruelty wasn't actually helpful. It's fine. It's not, though. You should report him or something. Nyla almost smiled at that. Report him. As if the school that let him reign unchecked for years would suddenly care now. As if the administration that had carefully looked away yesterday would suddenly find their accountability. I'll handle it, Nyla said simply. Madison's eyes narrowed slightly, perhaps catching something in Nyla's tone that suggested more than the words conveyed. Ow! But Nyla just closed her locker and adjusted her backpack. I should get to class. She walked away before Madison could respond, leaving the other girl standing in the hallway looking confused and maybe a little concerned. Behind her, Nyla could feel the weight of more stares, more whispers, more judgment. Let them think she was beaten. Let them believe their narrative. Underestimation was a weapon, and she was about to learn how to use it better than any of them had ever imagined. In her backpack, the martial arts club application felt like a promise she was making to herself. By the end of the day, it would be submitted. By the end of the week, she'd be registered. And soon, very soon, Ridgemont Prep would learn exactly who Nyla Ainsworth was. But first, she had to survive another day of being who they thought she was. Fourth period was physical education, a class Nyla had been dreading since she'd seen it on her schedule. The gymnasium at Ridgemont Prep was predictably impressive, gleaming hardwood floors, retractable bleachers, championship banners hanging from the rafters like battle standards. The space smelled of floor wax and adolescent sweat, familiar but different from her old school's cramped, outdated facility. Coach Anderson was a compact woman in her 40s with the muscled build of a former athlete and a whistle hanging from her neck like a talisman of authority. She had the entire junior class assembled in rows on the gym floor, approximately 50 students in their required PE uniforms, Ridgemont branded shorts and gray t-shirts that somehow cost $60 in the school store. Nyla had changed quickly in the locker room, hyper-aware of the sudden silence that had fallen when she'd entered, the way conversations had died mid-sentence, the way eyes had tracked her movement to an empty corner. No one had spoken to her directly. No one had needed to. The video had said everything. Now, standing in the back row between two girls who'd positioned themselves as far from her as possible without being obvious about it, Nyla listened as Coach Anderson outlined the day's activities. "We're starting a new unit today, basic self-defense." Coach Anderson's voice carried easily across the gym, authoritative and clear. "I know some of you think PE is just dodgeball and running laps, but self-defense is a practical life skill. You'd be surprised how many situations you could de-escalate or escape with just a few basic techniques." A few students exchanged glances. Someone in the front row, a boy in a soccer jersey, raised his hand. "Yes, Marcus." "Is this because of what happened yesterday?" He didn't bother hiding his smirk. "You know, in the courtyard?" Laughter rippled through the assembled students, not quite loud enough to be directly challengeable, but unmistakable in its target. Coach Anderson's expression tightened fractionally. "No, Marcus, this has been on the curriculum for 3 weeks. I don't schedule lessons around school gossip." Her tone suggested the topic was closed. Now, self-defense isn't about fighting. It's about awareness, prevention, and when necessary, creating an opportunity to escape. Most of you will never need these skills, but if you do even once, you'll be grateful you have them. She gestured to the mats that had been laid out in the center of the gym, thick blue training mats forming a square approximately 20 feet across. "We'll start with basic stance, then move to wrist grabs and escapes. I'll need a volunteer to help demonstrate." Silence. The particular silence of teenagers desperately trying to avoid being called on. I studied the floor, the ceiling, anything but Coach Anderson's scanning gaze. "Come on, people. Don't make me pick randomly." Coach Anderson's eyes swept the rows, then landed on Nyla with what might have been calculation or might have been coincidence. "Nyla, you're new. Come on up and help me demonstrate." The gym erupted in barely suppressed reactions, whispers, giggles, a few outright laughs quickly covered his coughs. Nyla felt every eye turn toward her, felt the weight of expectation, the anticipation of fresh entertainment. This was about to become theater, and she was the unwilling lead actress. But she walked forward anyway, because refusing would only feed the narrative they'd already written about her. Her footsteps were silent on the hardwood, then muffled on the mats. She stopped in front of Coach Anderson, hands at her sides, posture neutral. "Thank you, Nyla." Coach Anderson's voice was professional, but her eyes held a question. "Are you okay with this?" Nyla gave the smallest nod. "I'm fine." Before Coach Anderson could begin the demonstration, movement from the crowd caught everyone's attention. Lachlan Merrick stepped forward, that familiar smirk plastered across his face, his friends trailing behind like an entourage. "Coach, I'll be your partner." His voice carried across the gym with performative helpfulness. "I mean, you need someone closer to her size, right? For it to be realistic." He was already walking toward the mats, not waiting for permission because Lachlan Merrick never waited for permission. Tyler and Jaden positioned themselves at the edge of the mat space, phones subtly emerging from pockets. The audience sensed blood in the water. Coach Anderson's jaw tightened. Lachlan, I was going to demonstrate first. Come on, coach. It'll be better with 2 students. More relatable for everyone watching. He stepped onto the mats, positioning himself across from Nyla with exaggerated casualness. Besides, I want to make sure she learns how to defend herself. Since yesterday, she just took it. The gym exploded in laughter. Loud, unrestrained, cruel. Even students who'd seemed uncomfortable before couldn't help joining in, swept up in the collective permission to mock. Coach Anderson's whistle shrilled once, sharp and commanding. Enough. The laughter died to snickers. This is a PE class, not a comedy show. She turned to Lachlan, and Nyla could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. She could send him back, make a scene, assert her authority. Or she could let it play out, maybe teach him a lesson about respect in the process. Coach Anderson looked at Nyla. You comfortable with this? Every fiber of Nyla's being screamed to say no, to walk away, to preserve the careful control she'd maintained since yesterday. But another part of her, the part that had been forged in competition, that had faced opponents twice her size and won, recognized an opportunity when she saw one. Yes, ma'am. All right then. Coach Anderson stepped back, positioning herself where she could observe and intervene if necessary. Lachlan, you're going to grab Nyla's wrist, firm but not painful. This is about technique, not strength. Understood. Crystal clear, coach. Lachlan's smirk widened. He stepped closer to Nyla, invading her space with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive, overpowering. Ready, new girl? Nyla met his eyes, her expression perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. Inside, her heart rate had slowed to that particular rhythm she'd trained for years to achieve. The zone where time slowed down, where her body moved faster than conscious thought, where 12 years of discipline waited for permission to execute. Ready. Coach Anderson demonstrated the basic wrist grab escape on another student first. A simple twist and pull that used leverage instead of strength. The technique was elementary, something Nyla had learned in her first month of training years ago. The kind of move designed for people who'd never been in a physical confrontation, who needed to believe they could protect themselves with minimal effort. Lachlan barely watched the demonstration. His attention stayed fixed on Nyla, that predatory smile never wavering. He was already planning his victory lap, already imagining the new video that would circulate by lunch. The hose incident had gotten him 4,000 likes. This would get him 10. All right, Coach Anderson said, finishing her demonstration. Lachlan grabbed Nyla's right wrist. Firm grip, but controlled. This is about her learning the escape technique. Lachlan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His hand shot out and clamped around Nyla's wrist. Not firm and controlled, but aggressive, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. His other hand moved toward her shoulder, and Nyla recognized the setup immediately. He wasn't going for a simple wrist grab. He was positioning for a takedown, planning to throw her in front of the entire class, to add physical domination to yesterday's humiliation. The gym held its collective breath. Phones were definitely recording now, no longer hidden. This was the sequel everyone had been waiting for. Lachlan's weight shifted forward, his hand tightening on her shoulder, beginning the motion that would sweep her leg and put her on her back. He was strong, football training, weight room hours, the physical confidence of someone who'd never lost a fight because he only picked battles he knew he'd win. But strength without technique was just noise. Nyla moved. 12 years of training compressed into 2 seconds of perfect execution. Her right hand, the one he was gripping, rotated inward, not fighting his strength but redirecting it, using his own force against him. Simultaneously, her left hand shot up, gripping his collar with the specific placement her master had drilled into her thousands of times. Her right foot stepped deep between his legs, her hip rotating into his center of gravity. Ogashi, major hip throw, one of the first techniques taught in judo, one of the most devastating when executed correctly. Lachlan's eyes went wide as his world suddenly inverted. One moment he was in control, dominant, smirking. The next, he was airborne, his feet leaving the mat, his body pivoting over Nyla's hip like a lever arm rotating on a fulcrum. Physics and leverage doing what strength alone never could. He hit the mat with a sound that echoed through the gymnasium, a heavy, breathless impact that drove the air from his lungs and rattled his teeth. The crash was so loud, so definitive, that for a moment no one moved. No one breathed. The entire gym existed in stunned suspension. Nyla released his collar and stepped back in a neutral stance, hands at her sides, breathing steady. Not celebrating, not gloating, just standing there with the calm of someone who'd done exactly what she'd been trained to do, executed a technique as naturally as breathing. Lachlan lay on his back, gasping, staring at the ceiling with the confused expression of someone whose understanding of reality had just been violently revised. His friend stood frozen at the mat's edge, phone still recording, but forgotten, mouths actually hanging open. Coach Anderson was there in seconds, kneeling beside Lachlan. "Can you breathe? Anything hurt?" He managed a nod, then wheezed something that might have been "I'm fine," though it came out more like a dying animal's last sound. His face had gone red, partially from impact, partially from the dawning realization of what had just happened in front of 50 witnesses and multiple cameras. Nyla looked down at him, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried across the silent gymnasium with perfect clarity. "True strength," she said, "isn't about who you can hurt when they can't fight back. It's about choosing not to hurt someone even when you can." She paused, letting that sink in. "Yesterday, I chose not to. Today, you didn't give me a choice." The words landed like secondary impacts, each one precise, each one calculated for maximum effect. This wasn't trash talk. This wasn't victory celebration. It was a lesson delivered with the same controlled precision as the throw itself. Lachlan pushed himself up on his elbows, his face now shifting from red to pale as the full scope of his humiliation became clear. He'd been thrown, not just beaten, but thrown like he weighed nothing, like he was a beginner and she was a master. In front of everyone. On camera. By the girl he'd hosed yesterday. The girl everyone had called weak and pathetic. Coach Anderson stood, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp with assessment. "Everyone back to your lines. Now." Her voice brooked no argument. Students scattered back to their positions, whispers erupting the moment they moved. She turned to Nyla, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then Coach Anderson asked quietly, "How long have you been training?" 12 years, ma'am. I'm a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo. I also have rankings in Judo and Hapkido." Coach Anderson's eyebrows rose fractionally. "And you didn't think to mention this?" "You didn't ask, ma'am." A smile threatened the corners of Coach Anderson's mouth before she suppressed it. "Fair enough." She raised her voice to address the class. "What you just witnessed is why technique beats strength every single time." Nyla used leverage, balance, and proper form. Lachlan used aggression and overconfidence. You all saw the result. Lachlan had finally made it to his feet, supported by Tyler and Jaden, his varsity jacket somehow making him look smaller now instead of impressive. His eyes found Nyla's across the mat, and what she saw there wasn't anger exactly. It was recognition. Fear, maybe. Respect, definitely. The understanding that he'd made an enemy he couldn't bully, couldn't intimidate, couldn't dominate. "Lachlan, go see the nurse. Make sure nothing's injured beside your pride." Coach Anderson's tone was professional, but Nyla caught the slight emphasis on that last word. "Tyler, Jaden, escort him. Everyone else, partner up. We're drilling wrist escapes, and I want to see the technique Nyla just demonstrated. Minus the takedown unless you want to join Lachlan in the nurse's office." As the class broke into pairs, Nyla felt the shift in atmosphere like a physical thing. Students looked at her differently now, not with mockery or dismissal, but with wariness, with curiosity, with something that might eventually become respect. Madison caught her eye from across the gym and gave a small nod, a gesture that said, "I told you it wasn't fine," more clearly than words could. The phones that had been recording Lachlan's planned triumph had instead captured his defeat. By lunch, the new video would be everywhere. By dinner, the narrative would be rewritten. By tomorrow, Nyla Ainsworth would no longer be the girl who couldn't fight back. She would be the girl you absolutely didn't want to fight.